ecosystem. And biodiversity has been dwindling on our planet due to a number of reasons. Urban sprawl, lost a lot of areas in sprawl agricultural practices. And native plants have co-evolved with the native pollinators and the birds and the wildlife. And so as Wild Ones is trying to promote using native plants in our urban areas for landscaping to try to increase, get back some of that biodiversity within our urban areas. Locally, our Wild Ones Fox Valley area chapter provides a number of educational opportunities. We do have an annual conference that happens every year in January, February. We had about 200 people attending that. We have do a number of programs throughout the year, about 8 or 10 programs and tours. We provide native plant certification classes, and we do have a grant program, and we do have a native plant sale where we sell 4,000 to 5,000 plants, native plants, for people to plant locally in the Fox Valley area. So we do have a play over here. Come take a look and see the information that we have.
Thanks, Dan. What about Urban Ecology Oshkosh, Stephanie?
All right, so if the girls stand, I'm Stephanie. I am on the steering committee of Urban Ecology Oshkosh. So we are kind of finding our footing within the community. It's loosely based off of the Urban Ecology Center in Milwaukee. So what we really try to do as an organization is bring people to nature, if that's creating spaces that they feel comfortable in, or going on classes, or watching birds, things like that, just to get people to really connect with the nature that's around them. Because obviously we're acknowledging that we are not in like the North Woods. So we are in a specific type of environment here, but it's still one that we can appreciate and enjoy. So we really, the last Saturday, we had a bio blitz and a foraging event. So we, our city took part in the City Nature Challenge. So we had about 20 so people documenting and contributing towards citizen science about the biodiversity that is in this specific area. We actually had it right over there. And yeah, so I think that's kind of just a little bit about what we do. Thank you.
Nice. I'd have to admit, we limited our number of co-sponsors to 6 because there were so many other groups that would have tied into this important topic. And I guess, you know, as an aside, I think sometimes we get a little disheartened because of all the craziness going on in the world and some of the attacks on the environmental movement that we have going. But I was very heartened when I saw a list that the Right to Nature people put together, and I'm involved with that too. This is just, I guess, a short list of all the different environmental justice, faith groups, organizations that are involved in saving the environment that we came up with just quickly. So I thought it might be kind of fun to pass this around, and I added a sheet of paper on the back, and there's a pin there. If something is missing, an organization that you think would kind of line up with this kind of ethic or this kind of interest, please add it to the list, because we're trying to get as many organizations, particularly in the Fox Valley, that have this kind of interest. So pesticides, insect loss, and our future. The human toll of using neonicotinoids. Did I say that right?
Right.
Did I?
Depends on who you're at. Yeah.
Close enough? Okay.
Neonics.
We say neonics because of the fact that it's a challenging vocabulary word. So the genesis of this evening, and I guess I have to spin back many months, through Wild Ones, they advertised a webinar that was being sponsored by the Natural Resource Defense Council on this topic. And I'm a former child of a dairy farm, and I'm kind of interested in agriculture, and this sounded like it would be something I should know about. So I watched this lawyer from Natural Resources Defense Council do this amazing webinar presentation. And I was literally shocked. I was very upset about the implications for this toxin in our environment. And so I went to the board of Audubon and I said, do we want to maybe think about offering an educational opportunity? And resounding yes. And so long story short, I was reading articles in Clean Wisconsin, which Sarah's going to talk about in a minute. And there was another organization that was targeting this very important topic. So I thought, well, let's get some speakers pulled together. We'll offer a presentation and just provide information for the public. So here we are with two very dynamic and very well-educated and well-informed women. So I met Sara through the publication called The Defender, which comes out from Clean Wisconsin, and she's got all of her information there. And you could probably say a few words about that organization and maybe tell a little bit more about who you are. But her title is the Water and Agriculture Program Director for Clean Wisconsin. The other presenter, a friend of mine from UWO, also is an expert on this topic, and she teaches this information in her classes at the university. And she even gave me a little bio here, so I can tell you a little bit of what she does. Shannon Davis-Foust has her PhD in biological sciences from UW-Milwaukee and has widespread interest in environmental health. She presently teaches courses at UW-Oshkosh in biology and environmental studies. Some of her students are here, and her son, who's a student of hers, and is an affiliate of the Sustainability Institute of Regional Transformations, advises the Student Environmental Action Coalition, otherwise known as SEEK, and sustainable beekeeping. And actually, we have several hives on campus that Shannon helps to tend. Her hobbies include hobby farming, beekeeping, and ecological restoration. So the dynamic duo is going to take off, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say.
Sure. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you. As Mary Beth said, I am from Clean Wisconsin. And for those of you guys who don't know us, we are a statewide environmental organization. We've been around for 55 years this year. So ever since the Clean Water Act became a thing, we have been doing this type of work. I have the opportunity and the pleasure to be able to oversee all of our work that we do on water and agriculture topics, but we do a lot more than that too. So if you're ever interested in looking at the broad array of topics that we work on, it's everything from clean water to clean air and clean energy, land use and land access as well. So it's a very broad portfolio of environmental topics. We have a really dynamic crew of individuals that work with us. We have people like me who are advocacy policy folks, but we also have a strong communications team, a legal team that does help us win lawsuits when necessary to help protect the environmental laws that we all really often take for granted, frankly. So I'm here today on behalf of the water part. We obviously cover topics, everything from PFAS to these areas, which are near and dear to my heart of water and agriculture and that interface between the two. I've spent my career in the state for 22 years working at that nexus of water and agriculture, working at the Department of Ag for 16 years before I left and joined the nonprofit realm just 3 years ago. But doing all of that, I worked hand in hand with farmers to help them implement conservation practices on their fields to help improve water quality, pollinator habitat, keep their soil in place, and all of those good things that we all rely on for a solid and sustainable food supply as well. So the morph into the nonprofit world really just started because I got a little itchy to get out of DATCAP after 15 years and try something else before my time runs out in my professional career. And I've loved every minute of it. There's really something special to be able to work with other individuals and share information just like we're going to do with you all tonight. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And now I'm going to let Shannon start us off, and we're going to do a little bit of tag team on this. So we'll kind of jump back and forth. We'll have about an hour worth, I think, of content.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, probably 25 minutes per speaker, and then we'll have Q&A. I'm just doing a sound check. Can everybody hear okay in the back? Because we do have a microphone. Okay,
Great. Thanks. Take it away.
thank you, Sara.
Welcome, everybody.
Completely frozen.
Swear it was working a minute ago.
It was. All right. How many of you have seen this headline? Like this has been this spring's headline. How many of you are aware that there are headlines right now for the past month that are saying that we are looking at about 70% loss in honeybee colonies? That's crazy. So I started teaching about bees around 2008. And I think it was around then I got interested in bees and got bees right away. I started teaching out of a book called Fruitless Fall and was trying to figure out what is causing colony collapse disorder in bees, which was what was happening is the bees were just flying off and disappearing. And some beekeepers were losing literally all their bees. Could you imagine being a beekeeper and this is your entire world? This is how you make a living and all of your bees suddenly disappear. They were saying, oh my goodness, aliens, alien abductions. They didn't know what was going on. And this emerged in the United States around 2006, 2007. And for a while, beekeepers were not communicating with each other. They were afraid that they would call each other, piss poor beekeepers. And it came out then that they were all losing their bees. And we have been trying to figure out why for a very long time. And there's a lot of confusion here, which I'm going to try to explain at the very beginning of this. So right about that, this was around 2013, and this is where people got really alarmed. This happened at Target. People were just coming to Target, and they were noticing bumblebees were falling. There were thousands of bumblebees laying on the sidewalks, and people really noticed. And they ended up counting something like 59,000 bumblebees on the ground. They were pollinating, I think, a cherry tree right in front of Target over in Oregon, and it was really amazing for people to see this number of bumblebees. And they did samples and they found that they had a new kind of a neonicotinoid, neonic, we will call them, that they had succumbed to. And there were other insects that had died too, but it was really the bumblebees that they were noticing. So to start this all off, how much is pollination worth? How do you estimate how much pollination is worth? It's an ecosystem service that we rely upon, we take for granted because it's normally for free. But just try to imagine we had to hire humans to pollinate all the orchards and all the crops. And when you think about the vast majority of our crops, something like 80% of our food is pollinated, that's a lot. If you look at the number of species and how much money it would cost, and it literally isn't possible to hire enough human beings to do that. They say that about 1 out of every 3 bites of food it relies on pollinators. And if you look at that in terms of money, we're looking at about $350 million that was estimated in 2023. And if you add the wild bees on top of that, we're looking at about $3 billion per year to the US economy for pollination services that we typically get for free. So what is happening? Are the bees on strike or is there something else happening? So we're going to talk about first just understanding why we are so confused, and then understanding exactly how neonics affect bees, how they kill. And then Sara is going to continue on to talk about their problems in Wisconsin. I have about 30 slides on the different effects of species and ecosystems and on humans as well. I'm going to zip through those really fast, I promise. But it's a crazy number of studies, and a lot of them are fairly recent. And then we'll talk about regulation both globally and locally. And of course, what you can do. We can never leave you just, hanging on a cliff, wondering what you can do to help solve this problem. So first of all, if you do a search, you type in, what's killing bees? You will likely get a whole lot of different answers. And oftentimes pesticides doesn't even show up first on the list. So I want to explain why. This is for honeybees. And we have to remember too that the reason that we know so much about honeybees is because they're livestock to us. And imagine if you're a farmer and you lose, let's say you are a farmer of cows and you walk out one day and 30% of your cows are laying dead on the ground. And you have to endure that year after year. You're not going to survive very long in farming.
So if you look at, in terms of bees, what's killing them, and you will see this very long list. You'll see everything from different kinds of diseases, and yes, they mentioned insecticides on here. When we're trying to treat animals, we're using antibiotics, and we're dealing with antibiotic resistance, genetic engineering, habitat problem. Habitat loss is, of course, a big one, and habitat loss overlaps with a lot of other issues. Of course, different kinds of air pollution. So what is it? What is causing the death of the bees? So one of the reasons why the answer is not very clear cut is that there are misinformation campaigns. Unfortunately, our food is owned by industrial agriculture. A few years ago, I don't know how many years ago now, Bayer bought out Monsanto. They have something like $10 billion together. Bayer and Syngenta, I think, have $10 billion together, more than the next biggest agricultural firm. So the problem is they have a lot of money invested, and they will intentionally put out information. They keep pesticides on the list, but they don't put it up front. So definitely all of the factors that we just talked about in the previous slide, they all play a part in what's killing bees, but there is some confusion because of misinformation campaigns. So what are neonics? Neonics are a neurotoxin that when they get into an insect's body, into their brain, they will attach to the same receptor that would take nicotine, and it permanently attaches to those receptors, and it causes the bee to twitch uncontrollably until it's paralyzed, and then it dies. And I will turn it over to Sara.
Great. Okay, so neonicotinoids are very prevalent. We use them almost pretty ubiquitously globally. So we are not alone in Wisconsin with this, but they are used in crop systems as a seed treatment for the most part, but they can also be applied foliarly, so sprayed onto vegetable crops especially. There's also soil treatments that can be added to crop fields to inject the neonics into the system. They are used mainly, of course, to deal with bugs that are causing agricultural problems. So this is not new. We've had these kinds of root borers, wireworms, certainly aphids we all know about on our home gardens as well. So these bugs are not new to us, but this neonicotinoids, since the early 2000s, is a new treatment for them. Prior to this, we were using some very harsh chemicals to impact the insect populations and make sure that our crop yields are what we need them to be economically. But the problem has been that there grew to be some resistance to those, and they are identified as some additional environmental issues associated with some of those prior insecticides. So neonicotinoids came on the market, and initially were really viewed as being less detrimental environmentally and to other species, mammals, fish, etc., humans certainly, than what was being used prior. So at the time it seemed like this might be a great option, an alternative to the prior chemicals that we were using in our cropping systems traditionally. So with that, it became extremely popular. So this graph shows from 1992 on the far end up to 2014, where you're seeing that big spike. That's the increase in neonicotinoid use just in the United States. It is 48 times more harmful to insect life now than we were 25 years ago, just given this amount of chemical injection into our crop systems. The different colors are showing the different types of neonicotinoids that we're using most in the country and in the state right now. And the top three really being these three on the left: imidacloprid, methoxam, I always get that one a little mixed up, and then clothianidin. So you'll end up seeing those a couple of different places throughout our talk, perhaps. But there's about 5 to 7 or so main neonics that we're using in the United States and globally. What happened here, in which you can see in the rate of that graph increase, is up to 2014, we were tracking this. We, as a country, were tracking how much neonicotinoid was being used in agriculture in our country. And then in 2014, there was a law that was passed that got in front of the need to report treated articles. And I don't want to get too wonky on that, but what that means is essentially like if it was put onto something else, and not just in a gallon jug that you'd be spraying out into your crop fields or into our gardens, for instance, that no longer had to be reported. So 90% of what is used in neonicotinoids is on seeds. So corn seeds, soybean seeds predominantly are already treated. They have a coating of this stuff on them. And the idea is relatively sound in theory, right? That, you're putting on the seed, as that seed grows, it's in the ground. The neonicotinoid can get taken up as in the roots and in the plant material as that plant grows. It's systemic. And so it gets taken up all the way into that plant and all of its leaves and its fruit. And therefore, as anything eats it, whether it's that aphid you saw earlier on or that root borer, those insects will come in contact with that neonic and have this repercussion of death or at least severe damage. And so recovering the crop productivity. Once that happened, as you can tell, the reporting, kind of drops right back off. We really have no idea, no sound idea how much of this stuff is actually in the environment. And although Shannon will cover a little bit more of that later on. This is what it looks like by crop. So it just gives you a bit of an idea. Maize being corn, the brightest red up there, soybean, next cotton, vegetables and fruit, orchards and grapes, a little bit in wheat. We don't have much rice here, but the kind of other crops all mix into that bottom piece. So again, just kind of recognizing the prevalence of use. At this point in time, between 79 and 100% of our seed corn has this already on it. So farmers have really very little to, if any, choice in actually buying a seed that doesn't have this on it, unless they're going for an organic production seed, which often will cost more money. If they're not an organic producer, they're not going to go that route to buying an untreated neonic seed. The other problem is that they often don't know what's on their seed. So our farmers, I've worked with hundreds of them over my time, and we talk a lot about what their equipment is, how they're tilling, when they're doing certain things, when they're applying their fertilizers and that kind of thing. But really recognizing what the chemicals are that are coming with that seed, especially, is often unknown by the actual farmer that's planting those out in their fields. In 2025, as of today, we have 525 products that the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, which is where I worked for that 15 years, I oversaw this unit at one point in time. And that's how many products we have registered in the state. That's not just agricultural. That's one thing that's very important for us to know. We are all using neonics in our daily lives without even really recognizing it often, because a lot of these products are not just, like I said, that seed treatment or foliar spray, but there's products that we can buy at Home Depot that will have this if we're treating our lawn for pests. If you're treating, for ants or other things around here, a chemical slew is available, and it's often very hard to discern what yours is because there's trade names associated with it. So it doesn't just say this contains neonicotinoids or this contains imidacloprid. You have to know that's a neonic certainly, but it comes under a trade name instead. And so it's really confusing for a consumer to understand what we might be buying and applying. Also pet collars. That's another kind of example of a situation where we often don't recognize, where our pets are also often being coming in contact with this, and as are we in our day-to-day environment. So as I mentioned, these are the use in Wisconsin specialty crops. This is a slide I stole from Russ Groves at the University of Wisconsin, who's in plant pathology, who worked on the last neonic presentation day that we did back in October. So this just gives you an idea of the major crops, potatoes being one of them in our state. There's a lot of neonicotinoid that goes into potato production in Wisconsin in particular. Our sweet corn, snap beans, et cetera, that go into our canned and processed foods that we are a big contributor to. It's a big part of our agricultural industry in Wisconsin. This is an ability to just kind of see, this is back in 1995. So the darker color kind of indicates the greater amount of use. You can see a little bit of yellow and a little tan colors in there. So that was in 1995. And then if you fast forward, that's in 2014. So it just kind of gives you an understanding of the breadth and extent of where these chemicals are being used across our country currently. My guess is this would go up even more, of course, because this is the last year that we actually had data to represent how much is going on our seed corn. If I overlaid a different map here with where we're growing field corn to feed our livestock or corn to feed ourselves, you'd see a lot. on there too. And that would probably maybe even be a better representation, like I said, because it's from every, all the studies and investigations, nearly 100% of our seed corn is already covered. This is a graph that is showing what we're using in our ornamental world. So again, this is some of the reason why we have our sponsor partners here with us talking about using native plants and responsible nurseries, etc. Nurseries really rely on these a lot more than I realized before I started doing this research. They use it because, you know, in those kind of close proximities, real wet area, you know, in greenhouses, etc., pest control can be a real challenge. And these have been a really easy way to try to get at the issues associated with insect in nursery production. So these are all the different kinds of neonics that are being used that way through our ornamentals. And then, as I mentioned, don't forget our furry friends. So these are the different ways and sources on the far left there that may have a neonicotinoid incorporated into that product, obviously moving into our pets and into their fur and whatnot. So the other important, Shannon will get to a lot of the effects on mammals and humans later on, but the one thing I found really interesting in the study that I'm contemplating on this slide is it gets into the fur of the animals then. And then as my dog sheds all over the world and my home every day, that fur gets taken up and used by birds in their nests and whatnot. And that becomes another vector for application, if you will, into our environment, unintentionally, certainly.
So the interesting thing about neonics compared to DDT is bioaccumulative and biomagnifies through the food chain. So one big difference is that neonics are not like that. They will actually move rather quickly through the environment. And we thought at first, or at least it was at first advertised, that neonics weren't persistent, but we actually are finding they're quite a bit more persistent than we thought. They hang around the soil for a long time. But if they can get washed away in water, they will. So the statistic I've been giving my class for years is that when you spray a pesticide, about 5% of it actually hits the intended target, and about 1% is lost in the air. And then the rest of it, most of it, goes into soil and water. The thing is with neonics, if a bird comes along and eats a coated seed, it can just kill the bird outright. So this doesn't account for a small number of seeds might be taken directly by a bird. There's a lot of different bird species that spend time in fields, cranes and other species. So you can imagine that there is another percent here that would account for animals that just take the corn seed right out of the field. This is all right.
Perfect. Okay, so to Shannon's point, they are very soluble in water. And that's important, right? Because, you know, as a plant's taking up nutrients from the soil, it's coming through the soil water. So to be able to move up and through the plant, it needs to be soluble. As such, it moves around, as she was also indicating. So this is a map on the left that is from the Department of Ag. They do groundwater surveys about every 5 years. And then they have actually done, and there's another study I didn't flag here, but was simply on straight neonics and where we're fine. They were sampling purposefully for them in 2022, I believe it was. So this is a study over time where they've been looking at long-term monitoring wells across different locations across the state, as indicated on the map. And when they've been testing those for lots of other agricultural chemicals, that is the job of DACAP to do that, flagging for neonics. The triangles are noted or places where we're detecting these, or where they have been detected in these well samples over time. And then indicating, you can see the numbers on the left for the statistics on that. So about 17% of the wells that have been tested by DACAP over this time period have had detections, and over 1,000 of the groundwater samples in general. So it's kind of, some of these wells have been sampled more than once, is my point. So that's why the numbers are a little bit different there between groundwater samples versus number of actual wells that had detections in them. But these are wells that are or are adjacent to wells that we are all drinking out of. A third of our population in the state has private drinking water wells to supply our drinking water. So this is very important, especially in rural areas that are going to be closer to the agricultural centers where the majority of neonics are being used and applied. stuck again.
The potential just adds suspense, didn't you?
Exactly. Let this dwell, settle into your brains for a second here before we move on. So it's just stuck. Just hit the forward little button. No, that was
I'm
already
recording it from here. I'm recording right now.
Oh yeah, try forwarding it where it's like this.
now.
On
Yeah,
that, yeah.
Oh. Okay. That worked now. Okay. So the last map was groundwater. Those were wells looking down at the aquifers that we grab a lot of our drinking water from. This is surface water samples. We've done a lot less of these. DATCAP isn't really usually in the business of sampling a bunch of surface waters. That tends to be DNR's shop. And so because of that, we hadn't been gathering this kind of data because DNR hadn't been prioritizing looking at pesticide chemicals in some of the surface water systems. So a lot less numbers, but similar kind of results if you take a look at that. So of the 21 stations that we've been doing the surface water sampling over time, 33% of them had detections at some point in time, and at least 20% of the surface waters that we sampled had neonicotinoids detected at some level as well. No. Yay, okay, that's what we're gonna have to do. Okay, so this is just a little bit more about what neonicotinoids are we finding. And this is important because I'll get to that later when we talk about what we can do about this as a state, either regulatory or voluntarily. But there are three main ones that we care about, those clethianidin, imidacloprid, and the thiamethoxylam, something like that. Those are the main three. But it also shows the detection rates up in the far left, recognizing pre-post 2018, 2019. And that just means that we got better at being able to detect this stuff. So we as labs have to kind of train ourselves to get down to a level of detection. And so what happened is that prior to 2019, the methods we were using weren't able to detect at really low levels. And so once we were able to improve those methods, we found it more. That's pretty much the point of that slide. Okay.
Okay, so I promise that this whole presentation isn't on bees. There's actually quite a bit more, and you might have to put on your seatbelt as I go through these slides. But I want to tell you that when I first became a beekeeper about 16, 17 years ago, right away, I lost about half of my bee colonies each year. And when you lose a bee colony as a beekeeper, you do a little bee necropsy, a hive necropsy, and try to figure out what happened. And oftentimes I can figure out what happened. But when I moved to the country, after I'd been beekeeping in the city, don't tell Amro, and I moved out to the country, and it was amazing to me because I was losing about half of my bee colonies when I lived in the city. But when I moved to the country, I lost them all every winter. I think out of all these years, I only kept one colony survive the winter. That was it. And I have a farm field right behind me. I see them spray, and yeah, I know that they do lots of things back there. So I'm pretty sure. And then I saw my bees just disappear, just like CCD, colony collapse disorder. So I believe I've witnessed it myself in my small little hobby beekeeping. So they are highly toxic and they threaten our health. So we're going to go through these studies. So this is the fact though, they can kill one bird, but there's enough neonic on one coated seed to kill 250,000 bees, 250,000 bees. And when the plant grows, every cell of the plant uptakes some of the chemical. And at first they didn't think there was much in the pollen and nectar, but the truth is there's some of this chemical in all of the plant. But this is where things get really confusing. And this is what I've been teaching about for years. And as I examine students to see if they comprehend this, a lot of students don't comprehend this, but I will do my very best to explain this. So this slow death, so there's no smoking gun when it comes to how, like, to recognize when you shoot a gun, right, the victim falls over dead instantly. You know it was the bullet that killed them, but when they die slowly, it's much more difficult to figure out what happened. So we're gonna look at the lethal versus sublethal effects. The sublethal effects is where it gets complicated. So I teach that there are at least 4 different systems in our bodies that the neonics affect. The nervous system, as we've been talking about, that's what they're designed to affect. They affect every aspect of the foraging behavior, being able to communicate, the larval development. But then when we move on, we're gonna talk about reproduction, digestion, and the immune system as well. So here's 4 different systems: your nervous system, your digestive system, your reproductive system, and your immune system. And I also wanted to say before, back in the 1990s, when we started using neonics, beekeepers were only losing about 5 to 10% of their colony, and they were mostly losing them to mites, the varroa mite, which that actually greatly increased the losses that beekeepers were experiencing back in the 1980s. And then it jumped around 2006, 2007 to about 30% of their colonies. So each winter they were losing. And now, like I said before, we're predicting losing 70% of the colonies each winter. So here are the studies. We're just going to look at a few bee studies, and then we're going to move on to many other insects, and also we're going to move into vertebrates. So we found that they affect the honeybee and queens. In fact, it reduces their ability to successfully lay eggs by about 50% when treated with neonics. Not just the queens, but also the drones, the males. We can see that their sperm count is lowered when they're exposed to neonics. So that was the reproductive system. With the digestive system, how that affects them is it affects their microbiota in their guts. Bees have a special assemblage of microbes in their guts in order to digest food, just like most other animals do. And this chemical affects their microbial activity. The immune response is also affected. And this is where it gets super confusing, because when you go to do that necropsy on your beehive to figure out why your bees died, well, now it looks like they died of mites, or it looks like they died of a virus or a bacteria or a fungal disease. And there's so many studies here, I couldn't even begin to scrape the surface to explain to you how many studies have shown that neonics are affecting the ability of bees to fight off different kinds of diseases and parasites. So here's an example with a viral pathogen. And then moving into wild bees as well. We've found that there's immunosuppression with wild bees. And yes, so you're looking at the internal response, but also even the response to be able to clean off the mites. So even the parasites on the bees are able to be more effective with the presence of neonics. And when we compare honeybees to wild bees, we actually find the honeybees are a bit stronger than our wild bees. So that again is of concern. And why we're talking so much about honeybees, please recognize that they're livestock, we make money on them, so we study them a lot. We know a lot about them. We know much less about wild bees, but we're getting to know more and more, and it's not good. So the wild bee population. In some groups, high pesticide use contributed to 43.3% decrease in the probability that a species occurs at a site. And yes, our beloved monarchs, we have been tracking monarch numbers for a long, long time, and we can see clearly that they're dwindling. There's a number of factors, but we have found that neonics are also a factor with a monarch decline. And not just with monarchs, but with butterfly species richness in general. And we found that for the American Midwest, where our Corn Belt is. And let's broaden this now to all insects. Entomologists have been decrying that we are currently experiencing an insect apocalypse for quite a few years now, since at least 2021. And there are many different studies that are clearly showing around the world that there's a major decline of bees. Here's a comparison from 2007 to 2019 in Costa Rica. And then just looking at several different studies side by side, 45% decline by Durzo 2014 in a couple of different species here. We have the 5% annual decline in Germany. So 5% year after year after year, clear decline in flying insects. And then looking at multiple global studies, bringing it all together, you can see the lines in all of these studies go down. And is this a second silent spring, or is this fruitless fall? We can see also that the bird declines that are linked to these popular pesticides. And what's interesting about the bird declines is what we are seeing right here we have looking at the exposure to the treated seeds, seeing that the prairie grouse in this example were declining in relation to the neonics. But looking at birds in general, we can see that it's the insectivorous birds that are much more impacted than the ones that are not relying on insects for their diet. So it's clear to see that it's those bird species that are eating the insects that are most impacted. In North America, since 1970, they say that there are about 30% fewer birds. Nearly 3 billion birds gone. Fish, let's talk about fish. This first came out in the 1990s in Japan. They clearly saw that there was a crash in the zooplankton biomass after they started using neonics, and they saw that was linked to the loss of the smelt harvest. And at this point, it's really hard to find studies like this because neonics are used so ubiquitously throughout the world that this was like they were first starting to use them, but they could see this major crash in this zooplankton and in the smelt. The mayflies, we're seeing mayfly losses in relation, and while we don't have a lot of studies in the United States and the loss of fish, we do see that a lot of the insects that they eat are in decline. Moving on to deer and other mammals. We have the first evidence was in the 1990s where someone had just casually noticed as they were collecting deer samples that the deer that were dying had overbites, and they were noticing that they had enlarged heart ventricles, and they were missing the thymus gland and scrota. So further studies found a link with having a decreased jawbone length, decreased body and organ weight, decreased thyroxine levels, and they were seeing the increased fawn mortality. In the Minnesota DNR, they could see that there were they could see that link. They were looking at this. They were seeing that there was an increase in the concentration of neonics over time between 2019 and 2021. So we've come to a point where that it's been declared now that neonics are likely the most ecologically destructive pesticide used since DDT. When we move on to humans, it was first found that there's a link between type 1 diabetes and neonic levels. And this is when they would take they take blood samples to determine neonic levels, and also in pregnancy. So measuring blood neonic levels in pregnant women, they could see that there are linkages with birth defects in the heart and brain, autism-like symptoms, cognitive impairment. And I could hardly read this without just crying because it's just so depressing to realize that there's a link here. The decreased sperm quantity and quality, decreased testosterone, altered insulin regulation, and changes in fat metabolism. Yeah, and to realize that they're seeing a connection with brain thinning and exposure to neonics in humans. Thank you.
As you guys are all coming in, you came past the table of materials that we brought along. Those are ones that we've been partnering with the Xerxes Society, which is another environmental nonprofit group that really focuses on monarchs in particular, but other pollinators have kind of spread their wings, pardon the pun, on that way. But some of the materials were for them. But there was, to Shannon's point, an environmental health brief that Clean Wisconsin developed. We have a science director, and we've been partnering with the Milwaukee and Wisconsin medical colleges, but also the Population Health Institute at the UW. And so we've brought in a fellow that is looking solely at environmental outcomes of environmental contaminants in our world. And they just released the brief on neonics this last week. And so you guys all got it hot off the presses. It's 10 pages. So to save the environment, we're all here to learn about. I only printed 5 copies. So the first 5 of you maybe got it, I'm not sure. But it is available on our website. And so there's a QR code on the table over there. So all of you who are savvy with your cameras on your cell phones, take a photo of that and it'll get you right over to the page that has a lot of information about neonics. We did a forum like this that Shannon and I are doing today that took all day. We spent 8 hours. We had over 280 people joining us either in person or online last October. That a lot of this kind of fodder, and we've gotten a lot of motivation from that sense because a lot of interested parties. So a lot of the information she waved through, you can get access to through her resources and ours as well. So you've learned a lot about the extent of use, all the impacts both to the little critters that we like and then also potentially to ourselves. What can we do about this? So and Shannon will get to that at the end, what individuals like us can do, but there is of course places around the world where people are taking action. So all of this data has really culminated into an interest in some countries and in some places in our country to do something about this issue. So the UK and the European Union took the first stab at that. They have been working toward neonic bans and have been successful in placing one since the earlier in 2013 was the first moratorium. They kind of walked back and forth a little bit on it, I have to say, but there is currently a ban on neonic use. Small exceptions for certain situations that they can be used in agricultural production. But for the most part, the EU has implemented a ban on using neonics in their cropping systems. Canada has done something as well. I'll get to that in a second, I guess. This is just a few of the headlines relative to that. So that's been huge, honestly, because it's that spark that's necessary for, frankly, all those seed companies that you also saw in that really confusing chart that Shannon showed. It forces them to have to provide an alternative product out there. So at least it offers an option. Certainly in the EU, they have to follow it, but that means that options are going to start being generated. Those are just pictures of what that means. There was a lot of concern about the neonic hit to farmers in the UK, and it's not without that potentially happening. So it's something that people are recognizing and taking a deep breath about before deciding to act on it here in our country, for example. That said, it doesn't have to always have an economic hit. And in fact, sweet, there we go. Thank you. Canada has put a pseudo ban. They have an interesting, and frankly, probably in my investigations, the regulatory policy, if you will, that I like the best so far. And that is that it's still available. They haven't done an all-out ban, but they have put strict requirements on when and how you can use it. And what it means is that you have to demonstrate the need for it. So you have to see and actually that the pests that you're trying to control exist in the field. So this crop scouting 101. I used to do it back in high school and early college for dollars. And so you go out and scout for pests, and that's what they're being required to do again. So it's kind of reverting back toward integrated pest management philosophy, if you will, and practices that we kind of moved away from really since the early 2000s. So having to be able to document that a pest exists, your agronomist has to dovetail with you and you have to go together and ask to be able to use this stuff. And then you can. But what they end up actually finding is that they didn't really need to. They rarely found that as being a problem, and or there was alternatives that became available that were actually cheaper and less problematic for that system. So I don't want to sugarcoat it entirely. There's certainly situations where farmers have taken economic hits, so it's not like it's without its potential issues, but it dropped their use by 95% of neonics, and seed-treated corn is really not a thing anymore up in Canada. Thank you. So what is the US doing? Well, we're really good at studying stuff. So the first time that, we hear about these kind of things, and so we put our top scientists on it, which is a great first step in a lot of ways, but a lot of that science has already been done. But certainly the United States often takes that kind of approach to try to identify what's the what if we were to ban these things, pull back, institute more controls on their use, etc. So other things that are happening in the US though. So the EPA does have to do an endangered species consultation process. They've been undertaking that for a little while now. They have issued some first declaratory statements about neonics and relationship to and potential impacts on endangered species, which is a good step, like I said. Registration reviews do have to happen once every 15 years for all of these types of chemicals under the FIFRA Act, which I'm not even going to try to get through all the acronym of that, but that's what is attached to that treated article clause that I talked to you about. It's an exemption underneath that law that allows seed treatments not to have to be reported. So during each of these reviews, in theory, the EPA does need to establish that the chemical does not have an unreasonable adverse effect on the environment. And then the food control or food tolerance petition in 2020 NRDC that you've heard about, Mary Beth introduced them in the beginning when the talk that she saw that kind of spurred tonight's event. They did petition the EPA to revoke the allowable levels of neonics in food and relook at what those tolerable levels should be so that all of us have a better understanding of what we are ingesting simply by opening up a can of stewed tomatoes that we bring home from the grocery store. There also has been litigation regarding that treated article clause. However, they failed. So that lawsuit was not successful. And so the treated article clause will continue to be a thing. So this is just a couple of the headlines out of EPA very recently in the last year, about their last couple of years, I guess, in that one, but about the different things that they have been studying relative to neonic use. But it hasn't, unfortunately, actually changed anything associated with the ability, access of those kinds of things for the products themselves yet. The first Trump administration did reverse a ban on harming pesticides in wildlife refuges. However, it was in this really big pesticide. One of the problems I think with it at the time was that this ban that the administration reversed was all pesticides in wildlife refuges. And unfortunately, even the National Wildlife Federation wasn't entirely for that kind of a ban because there are times when a chemical is actually a much better use to be able to get after a problem on a wildlife refuge than a natural treatment, if you will. So even though that happened, the Biden administration also kept that ban lifted. So it wasn't entirely a political stunt exactly, but it's a big question mark at this point about how our current administration is going to treat any of these things. Not to mention that with a lot of the removal of scientists from our main federal agencies that oversee these types of studies you've got a glimpse of earlier, it's going to be really challenging for us to even really collect and establish and then market, have outreach on the science that is able to get done, if any is. So lots of concerns around that. So what are the areas for change that we're looking toward? The largest use of neonics, like I said, is in the seed coatings. That's not tracked, but this is the likely uses. There's certainly lawn and garden uses that we have they're creating hotspots in urban centers. And then there's a relative number of regulatory loopholes where states are really not doing a very good job of regulating and tracking their pesticides generally, and certainly the seed treatments as well. So there is state-by-state action happening. Wisconsin is not on this list yet. We'll get to that in a little bit, but New York and Vermont were the first two to actually pass at the state level some types of bans and phase outs, really is what they are, on especially seed treatments, but other neonicotinoid uses as well. Like I said, they're phase-ins. So even with New York, that doesn't happen until 2027 and really 2029 until the industry has to move entirely away from seed treatments with neonics. New Jersey and Maine and Nevada also have similar kind of phase outs and bans. Sometimes it's about state-owned property and restrictions on those. Other times it's all out prohibitions on public lands, et cetera. So you can kind of get the breadth of that here. And then there's restricted use laws that do come into a number of different states that just provide additional limitations on who and when during the year, those types of things that you'd be able to apply some of these pesticides. Oh, I kind of jumped the gun on that one, I guess. So this gives you a little bit more about what the New York State Birds and Bees Protection Act looks like. Again, so you can see the time stamps here. So starting in 2027, lawn and garden uses. So that makes it a lot easier for us, right, as homeowners and golf course owners, operators to stop using this. Agriculture has really been leaning on this suite of chemicals for insect control for a long time. So they're giving them a little bit more time to move away from this. But again, there are always usually some type of exemption incorporated into these to be able to allow them in emergency situations, et cetera. So in Wisconsin, pesticides are overseen mainly by 3 different agencies. DACCAP takes the first stab at it. You have to report how much you are selling, register those products, pay a fee, that type of thing. We also do all that sampling that I mentioned, the samples that you saw on surface and groundwater taken by DACCAP. When they get those results and they find neonics in them, they ship that information over to DNR. DNR takes that along with all the other things that DNR is sampling water for E. coli, nitrates, et cetera. They wrap that up with a bow and they send it over to the Department of Health Services. It's Department of Health Services' job to establish drinking water and groundwater standards. So when it comes to what we're all ingesting through the water we get from our taps or that we're swimming in, those types of things, that's where that comes into play. So DHS's responsibility is to set those groundwater standards. And the interesting thing about that, it's very complicated as you'd expect, lots of steps in the process, but they go through a scientific evaluation to determine what is a safe level of imidacloprid in our groundwater that we can sit and ingest on the daily and likely not have adverse impacts to our health. So if you hear about groundwater standards, that's generally the process, how they're made. And this is the process to get them into law. So the only reason this is up here, you obviously can't read any of those letters, but there are 35 steps, 35 very easy, but also very long and not easy whatsoever steps to try to get these kinds of things established into rules that the Department of Natural Resources, DACCAP, whomever can regulate. So it makes it very challenging to actually move it from that science phase into action of some sort. But that has happened before, so there is precedent for this. This is before actually I moved to the state in 2000, but there was atrazine problems. Many of you might know about atrazine. It's an herbicide really heavily used for a long time, really effective at what it did. But it was also soluble. It moved a lot. It got into groundwater. And so the light gray spots that you can kind of see there in the map, those are all current atrazine prohibition areas. So the Department of Ag, when they find that the standard is being exceeded, the groundwater standard is being exceeded in areas, they just do an additional investigation. They kind of look, okay, here's where we found that. Now we'll start sampling more and more out, and they make kind of a big ring and figure out how far out that contamination might exist. And then they draw a boundary around that. And usually they'll start first with ratcheting back. So like they'll put restrictions on how much you can apply, when you can apply it, the form, method you're using, those types of things without calling it an all prohibition. In the case of atrazine, they tried that for a little while. Didn't work very well. We still had it in our groundwater at levels that were too high for human consumption. And so they instituted all prohibitions. So it is possible to do something like this, just in the, by really hitting the hot spots of where we're finding these types of chemicals. There's also the option for a standalone legislation, certainly. This is Representative Lee Snodgrass. She's just up, oh gosh, her number changed. I think it's 57 now, but she's just up here in Appleton area. She's local to y'all, so you probably might know her, but she has, I want to say this is going to be the third time this year that she's going to introduce a suite of bills called the pollinator package to protect them. And so it's a suite of different things. Some of it is on like a specialty license plate just to kind of help raise awareness, to bans on using them on DNR properties, to allowing cities and municipalities to decide for themselves if they want to prohibit neonics within city limits, townships, counties, etc. They did not go anywhere the last 2 sessions, unfortunately. She and I have been in touch though, and she is intending to introduce this package again sometime yet this session. So for those of you who pay attention to politics down in Madison, you will see something like this come out again in the next few weeks. But education and awareness can actually do a lot though. And I've been, working in policy, pseudo policy, and then very much policy advocacy for the last 3 or 4 years now. And this is the start of how policy happens. The need to really raise awareness and provide education about what the issue is, why it's a problem, why you each individually can and should care about it. That's the groundswell that we need to really be able to move the needle and move toward some kind of regulatory options surrounding this issue in particular. The other consideration is certainly that if we ban neonics, the potential exists that farmers will move to something else. So there's also a lot of research that's happening right now around alternatives to neonics, so that we can establish efficacy to be able to deal with these crop pests that actually do cause real significant damage to our crops here in Wisconsin, while making sure that we don't just move from one problem to another by adopting maybe more harmful chemicals in the future as well. So as I mentioned, in October, we had that one-day neonic forum in Madison. Again, on that QR code, you can go and see all those presentations from that day too. So they go into a lot more. There's a really cool one on bees, where there's a guy who has little cameras inside the beehives and then on bees, so he can tell where they move. And it really demonstrates Shannon's example of how bees' flight pattern is all screwed up once they've been impacted by neonics. Like they just get confused. They can't find their hives. Half the time they use a lot more energy to try to get back to it when they can find it, etc. So tons of great information. But as a result, that really spurred the creation of the Wisconsin neonicotinoid work group. So there's a sign-up sheet over there. If you want to add yourself to it, you can get added to the emails. We meet once a month virtually. I help steer it with a partner from the River Alliance of Wisconsin named Ellen Voss, and then AJ Janenga, who's the emerging contaminants specialist at UW Extension out of Green Bay. The 3 of us kind of coordinate this group, and really it's there to raise as an educational awareness opportunity so that people can understand more about this. You get these kinds of bits of information, new science, etc. We have a few different subcommittees you can get involved with if you so choose, but this is the kind of thing that is necessary to move the ball to get to some level of action around an issue like as big and thorny, frankly, as neonicotinoids in our environment and our agricultural system.
So as promised, we would go over what you can do. So first of all, we need to communicate with our local companies to stop using bee-killing pesticides. Don't buy them when you are aware that they're being pre-treated. Ask if you don't know. Yes. So find organically grown ones. There are lots of different plant sales. The Wild Ones is having a plant sale coming up. What is it? May 16th? May 16th, I believe. 17th? Yeah, Saturday. At Heckrod. You can buy some pesticide-free native plants there. Let your dandelions grow. They're not your enemy, I promise. And I'm guessing since many of you are here tonight, you probably already do let your dandelions and clover grow. I hope so. Resist using pesticides when you can. You follow the IPM model, integrated pest management. Just use pesticides when that's your last resort. I always say I'm getting out my big guns when there's something that I really need to use a pesticide for. I won't use it for farming, that's for sure. And then in terms of your pets, try to avoid using neonics. And I know that's hard to say when you're dealing with a flea problem or a tick problem. I get that, and Lyme disease, but try to find alternatives to neonics. buy local raw honey, support those beekeepers. Of course, you gotta throw that one in there. And, you know, buy organic food. A lot of people don't put in that connection that every time you go to buy something, you are voting. Every time you vote, you're voting for the kind of world you want to live in. If you're buying organic food, then you are not promoting supporting the type of food production that is using neonics. So it's not just about human health. It's not about your worry of perhaps ingesting, a little bit of pesticide residue. It's about supporting a healthier world. Talk to your friends and family, stand up and give a presentation. That's why I'm here tonight, is because I just wholeheartedly believe in making the world a better place. And I hope you are too. Thank you.
So. If anybody wants to sign up on Sarah's Clean Wisconsin clipboard, I'll certainly pass that around so people could sign on there. Questions?
One of the things, I know you guys are all just in, you have the sponsors that we have here, and you're affiliated with different groups within your own communities. And I'm actually kind of following the model that they use to establish, this immense educational campaign in New York ahead of their Birds and Bees Act. And a lot of that just comes down to talking with as many people as we can about this. And so if you are in groups otherwise that you would like to hear more about this kind of thing, we travel. That's what part of my job is to do these kinds of things and reach out and really integrate into communities. So no group size is too small. I've been in front of 5-member Westside Madison garden clubs to Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, Kiwanis, all those types of things. So keep that in mind. If you ever have an interest, just reach out and we're happy to travel.
Therapy, medicine, happy to.
Somebody's got to have a question. Yeah.
Do they include this now in just your simple water testing kits? I mean, like, are they, that is not,
No.
why don't they, is there any way to make that?
If you can ask for it, but I honestly, that's a good nod. I should find out what the cost is for them to do that. Most homeowner well water kits are going to do your, nitrates, E. coli, and then the natural background arsenic, radon, and things like that. So no, you'd have to ask especially for it. And next time I come around, I will have that information of which labs will do that. The lab that we use at the state is our integrated in a DACAP, but the state lab of hygiene will do it, but you have to ask for it. And I need to find out. My guess is it's not cheap. I don't think it's as expensive as testing for PFAS, but I don't think it's a $30 sample either. So I will get back to you. If you put your name on there, put a little star next to it, and I'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, these kinds of things are so important to know about that. Things are expensive, but you should know what you're doing.
There are a good list of consumer products that do contain chemicals, or like lawn services that.
We're working on it.
So we don't use those things, but it's all of poison signs every time you take a walk. Everybody's signs are out there like they spray things.
Right. So it's important to ask, I guess. And so, letting your neighbors know that might be the case is certainly, and you can ask, and your lawn care treatment, your applicators should know what they're applying and would be able to tell you. We're trying to, that's actually the next sort of phase of the work we're doing. I have a very stealthy intern who's working on compiling those kinds of things. There was I must have cut it.
Like you had Lowe's and Home Depot specifically listed, but there's signs and all kinds of other places. But is there like a consumer list of avoid this?
No, unfortunately, because the is one of those bills that the Snodgrass is sponsoring is to try to require that you can't put bee friendly on something if it's been treated with a neonic. Just having just saying that these are bee friendly plants in our nurseries doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't treated with neonics. It means that it's a flowering plant, it's a native, it's some other component that pollinators would like, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it hasn't in some time been treated with a neonic. So there is a lot yet to be done. I wish I had it on there. Maybe I had it in one of the materials over there. There is a woman who has been, her life's work seems to be to try to identify nurseries across the states, the United States, that provide neonic, that commit to neonic-free plants. But it's very hard to come by so far. So more to come on that.
Go ahead, Mary.
There was a online question from Kaylee Powell, asking, is there no companion planting that will decrease the pest destroying crops? I think maybe, are there companion planting? Is that more effective than neonics? Is there no companion planting that will decrease the pest destroying crops?
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
That's a little farther outside of my.
I do a little bit of companion planting, and I would say that there's enough. Neonics are extremely effective at controlling insects, so you might gain some control of companion planting, but it wouldn't be as effective as chemicals.
Crop rotations are a big part. I mean, just generally speaking, as how to break pest cycles in general. So I don't want to speak to the efficacy of that entirely for a neonic pest, but that's one of the main reasons why we want to have diverse crop rotations. And that could just doesn't mean corn after corn after corn, or corn, soybean, moving into other crops.
And trying to get away from monocropping and doing planting 2 or 3 species all in the same field. They're also looking at that. They're looking at more perennial crops. But it is true that farmers have to have a big problem when they have to stop using neonics. And if you look over in Europe, I know that it made headlines of how hard it hit farmers when they had to stop using neonics.
The study that I mentioned is actually being funded by the Wisconsin Potato and Vegetable Growers Association, which covers all of our specialty crops, potatoes, all those canned products, etc. So they're also taking it seriously. They recognize and see the writing on the wall and are trying to be relatively proactive in identifying alternatives so that they have something else to move to when and if more regulation occurs. Mary Beth, sorry.
Here I asked if these mosquito control chemicals, like they see advertised all over the body, and Camelon, those big companies, do either of you know the data?
I don't know, but I'm guessing they do not, because those are very effective like that. And so my expectation is that those are not a neonic.
Or neonics take time to affect the organism.
Not very long, depending, that's true.
The level of exposure.
Level.
Another great question I will find an answer for. You guys are giving me all good things to go back home to look up. Yeah.
So one, is there a list, like you had the actual trade name? I mean, that's the key. If you want to do this on your own and buy something, it won't say neonicotinoid on it. It'll say imidacloprid or something. Is there a list of that that you can easily get at, that you could look for those things? And I get the trouble, because all they have to do is make a different isomer of it, and you call it something else, and that doesn't get on the list for another 5 years. But at least the ones we know of that are here.
So that screenshot that I took, there is a portal through DACAP that you can do a search for. And so I like that, the one, so you have to go in and name it. So I had imidacloprid, and so that's right. I have those lists. There's 5 lists. Imidacloprid is the biggest one. There's 356 of those 525 that are from imidacloprid, and the other 2 are from the other two. So yes, it is that. So you would be able, but even for me, who has been kind of working in that realm for a while, it's really challenging to even appreciate which ones are home use versus agricultural use, unless you're really trying to put in the weeds on it. But yes, it does exist. And the slide deck we can certainly make available. This is being recorded as well. And so either reach out to me or consult the slide deck again, and it should show where I try to do my very best to source all of that stuff. So I can help you get that.
Then just a general question. Why is everything that's organic more money? When in theory, it should be less because you haven't had to apply all these pesticides and herbicides to those fields. So why do I pay more for an avocado or a lime that is organic?
There is more labor involved in controlling pests. A lot of times they're mechanically controlled. You've actually got to have people in the field controlling like the potato bug, right? You've got to actually have people removing in some cases. Yes, and of course the certifications, yes. Getting certified organic is extremely expensive. And you have to have regular inspections.
It's probably a volume thing also. I mean, if you don't even, there's lots of reasons, but it's mostly labor. Much more labor intensive. But it's so much healthier. The other costs are hidden. I mean, that we subsidize very unhealthy, not, you know.
The biggest problem from my perspective actually is, our crop insurance programs that we have at the national level and our commodity assistance dollars that go out to farmers to grow corn and soybeans mainly in our country is really, it's ubiquitous. It's a problem. Only because organics don't qualify. So you can't often get the same level of insurance. You don't get those commodity price payments if you have crop failures or other issues associated with it the same way that the commodity programs do. So right now we don't have a farm bill. We're still working off of the 2018 farm bill. It's another area of policy work I focus on. And all of the organic programs are zeroed out. The organic farmers are getting none of those assistance payments that the rest of traditional agricultural operators have access to. So it's a systemic problem that way, and a bigger one that we can sort out with this, certainly, but worth knowing about.
Can you just a quick search on like some of these, like the mosquito spots are mostly chemical based. The sugarcane camelons are anything that they're doing drop based is neonicotinoids. So all you have to search for is their chemical base and the back reference it for active ingredients, not tell you. So for a lot of them, you do it individually, and it's not just chemical company wide. You have to look at what applications they're doing on your lawn. So what type of sort of farming would determine whether it's on lawn.
So when you get the little slugs that like to crawl up your cooler when you're camping, and those are often a lot of the products are going to be the neonicotinoid products will be focusing for.
If you have a plant a flower that reseeds on its own, and if you don't know if it had neonics on it, will it?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know about the seed, or also even when you said it remains in the soil.
It remains in the soil. So it is uptaken again,
So
yes.
if you plant something that you know didn't have neonics, but there's something in the soil that you don't know about, can it take it up?
Yes.
Even if it didn't have
It can. That's what, so when Europe first banned, I think Wapple it was called, or something like that. That it was used on sunflowers and they stopped using it, but the bees kept dying. The CCD didn't stop overnight. It took a really long time because the sunflowers just kept taking it up some more, and all the plants are going to take it up that are in that same soil.
There's nothing to treat the soil with. I mean, in the small
Time. They all have a half-life, and so over time they will degrade into other chemicals, which often still are fairly affecting to insects, but will lessen to degrees as that half-life kind of keeps working itself out. So no silver bullet, but sooner we start, the sooner we get there.
Do they know how long the half-life of it is?
It's different for each of the chemicals. And the one I'm most aware of is the Theo one that I keep messing up. That one, its degradation product is almost as big of an issue as the initial chemical was. So, but similarly, there's a lot of work yet to be done, I think, on understanding that and trying to find alternative ways to break this down maybe quicker if that's even possible.
Is there a way to show support for Representative Sara perhaps? I mean, I just get her tons of credit for that at it all the time. Sure, it's frustrating. Is there a way that we encourage her and support what she's trying to do with that bill or resolution?
Yeah, so like I said, she's intending to release this package soon. We were just in touch this week, so I expect it to be in the next month or so. Once that bill package comes out, the first thing that happens is it goes out for co-sponsorship. So she will be the author on it, and she'll ask all of her legislative colleagues to join her in sponsoring it, which just means that they put their name on it and say, "Yep, we like this too." Last time around, it was entirely Democrats that supported the bills package or any of the bills in the package really. But the best way is after that, at that co-sponsorship time, once that information is out there, I can share that with all of you that are on the listserv, et cetera, and letting your own representatives, if that's Lee and Representative Snodgrass, great, let her know that you support this, you want this, but it's equally and probably more important to let other legislators know that you care about this, that this is an issue that is important to you and in your unique way too. I know that the cover, me sending one and having you all duplicate it and send that in is less effective, frankly, than it would be for each of you to call and leave that information, send an email. You can call after hours. So if you don't want to talk to anybody, you don't have to. You can just leave a voicemail letting them know that you support legislation to curb neonic use, something as vague as that, to something very specific, like I really want that bill, to pass. So we'll see. I mean, I think there is definitely more awareness around these issues than there were the last couple of cycles that she's put the bills out there. So it's entirely possible they'll have more success this time, but I would say that it's an uphill battle to assume that any of them will pass in any way through the two chambers this session.
There are different groups that certify organic, like is there California certification of organic, is that slightly different qualifications than say
Yes, different.
And how many are there, and which are the stronger ones?
Different organic companies do have different criteria to meet. For example, I know that Organic Valley requires a humane treatment of animals, and not all organic will. If you look for the USDA organic certified, then yes, that's a standard that no chemicals were used. But there will be some variation among the organic companies, yes.
Okay, and is it true that the California organic certification is stronger than the national one?
In the ways that Shannon just laid out, not on the chemical side. It still just means you can't use any non-natural products with growing that.
And the neonic is part of that.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Even the national one.
Yes, the national standard. If you see that organic stamp on your product, that's what you want to be looking for.
Okay.
What I don't appreciate is how well plants are also using that kind of a stamp or that kind of thing. But my indication would be for consumer protection laws that exist still in this country, then if it says organic, it needs to be organic. So, and that would mean on the chemical side. What Shannon was talking about, like she said, is like, animal welfare is another component that some states will incorporate.
Back for one last question, anybody? Well, we have the room till 7:30.
Take it on the road, Shannon.
I still